The storm outside roared against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, but inside, the real tempest was tearing Ava Sinclair's life apart. 6 months pregnant, barefoot, and still wearing the silk robe she had put on that morning, she stood frozen in the middle of the marble-floored living room as her husband, Ethan Cross, one of the most celebrated young CEOs in the country, adjusted his cufflinks as though he were preparing for a board meeting instead of ending their marriage. "You'll be fine," he said, voice clipped, almost bored. "This is the best decision for both of us. The board thinks the new image will help the company." "The new image?" Ava's voice cracked. "You mean the model you've been seeing behind my back?" Ethan didn't even blink. "Her name is Sienna Vale. She's poised, photogenic, and she understands the life I live. I can't have a wife who hides from the spotlight." Hides from the spotlight. That was his version of the truth. In reality, Ava had avoided the paparazzi and the endless social events because she'd chosen to live quietly, away from the cutthroat elite. She had never told Ethan her real last name, never let him glimpse the truth about her family, her fortune, or the tech empire her mother had founded before Ava was born. To him, she was just the soft-spoken woman who'd been working at an independent design studio when they met, the woman who fell for his confidence and vision. And now, he was throwing her away like yesterday's press release. "I'm pregnant, Ethan." Her hand instinctively cupped her belly. "This is your child." His jaw tightened. "My lawyers will arrange a settlement. You'll have enough." Enough. The word landed like a slap. Not love, not commitment, not even respect, just enough. The man who had once promised to protect her now treated her like an inconvenience. He reached for his coat. "The driver will take you to your apartment, the one in Brooklyn. You'll be more comfortable there." "I don't live in Brooklyn," she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. "That's a storage unit you bought to hide me from your friends." He didn't answer. He was already at the door. Introducing the female lead, Ava Sinclair, though Ethan knew her as Ava James, was 29 years old, a talented interior designer with an eye for both elegance and functionality. Or at least, that's the version of her life Ethan had been allowed to see. The real Ava had been born into the Sinclair dynasty, the sole heiress to Sinclair Technologies, a multinational giant that developed AI systems, cybersecurity solutions, and cutting-edge software used by governments and Fortune 500 companies. Her late mother, Elizabeth Sinclair, had been a tech visionary, and her father, Charles, still served as chairman of the board. But after her mother's death, Ava had begged her father for space. The endless networking, the journalists, the deals, it all felt suffocating. She'd moved to the city under an assumed surname, determined to prove she could build a life that had nothing to do with her family name. She never expected that the man she'd fall for would one day humiliate her in the most public way possible. Setting the stage. The Cross penthouse was a sleek testament to Ethan's ambitions. The glass and steel fortress towering above Manhattan, every corner meticulously curated to project wealth and dominance. Tonight, however, the space felt cold, stripped of the illusions Ava had once wrapped herself in. In the corner, a glossy magazine lay open to an article about Ethan's latest merger. On the opposite page was a photo of him and Sienna at a charity gala just 3 nights ago, her glittering gown hugging a body that screamed confidence and youth. The headline gushed about Ethan's magnetic new companion, but Ava hadn't realized how deep the betrayal ran until this very moment. The break, Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and smiled, an expression Ava realized she hadn't seen directed at her in months. "Sienna's downstairs," he said, without shame. "We're going to the Met Gala. I'll have the papers sent to you tomorrow." "You're divorcing me while I'm pregnant so you can take a model to the Met Gala?" Ava's voice rose. She didn't care if the neighbors heard. Ethan's gaze was flat. "The company needs stability. Investors don't want scandal. We'll make it look amicable." She let out a bitter laugh. "Stability? You're creating the scandal." He stepped closer, lowering his voice as though he were offering her a final piece of advice. "Ava, you don't have the power to fight me. Don't make this harder on yourself." For the first time that night, something inside her shifted. Not anger, not grief. Something colder, sharper. Power. She had the means to ruin him, to strip away every shred of the empire he thought he'd built without her. But she said nothing. Not yet. The foreshadow. When Ethan left, the silence wrapped around her like armor. She crossed to the window, looking out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere out there, behind tinted glass and locked gates, was the Sinclair estate. She hadn't stepped foot in it for nearly 5 years, but she still had the key. She pulled out her phone and scrolled past Ethan's number to the one she had kept hidden even from herself, labeled simply, Uncle R. Her mother's younger brother, Richard Sinclair, was the current CEO of Sinclair Technologies, and a man who never forgot a slight against his family. Her thumb hovered over the call button. The mini cliffhanger. She took a deep breath, pressed dial, and when his familiar voice answered with, "Ava, is everything all right?" she smiled for the first time that night. "Uncle R," she said, her voice steady. "It's time to come home, and it's time Ethan Cross learns who he just divorced." The following morning, the media was already buzzing. Entertainment blogs splashed photos of Ethan Cross and Sienna Vale stepping out of a black town car, cameras flashing as if they were royalty. Headlines screamed, "Tech CEO and supermodel make first public appearance, and Ethan Cross's new power couple era begins." Ava sat at the small breakfast table in her rented loft, untouched coffee cooling in front of her. The city outside hummed with its usual chaos, but in her head, there was only stillness. She had spent the night making lists, revisiting memories she'd buried, and replaying Ethan's words like a broken record. "You don't have the power to fight me." The call to Uncle Richard had been brief. He hadn't asked for details. "I'll send the car," he'd said. "Be ready by noon." Packing the life she chose, her life in the loft was a deliberate choice. Bare brick walls, mismatched furniture she'd found at flea markets, shelves lined with books and design sketches. She had built it herself, piece by piece, to be ordinary, to be free from the expectations that came with the Sinclair name. Now that chapter was closing. She moved slowly, folding clothes into a single leather suitcase. It wasn't about the belongings. Most of these could be replaced in a day. It was about the symbolism. She was leaving behind anonymity and stepping back into a world where every move she made could shift markets. At the dresser, her hand hesitated over a framed photo of her and Ethan from their first year together, smiling on a beach in Santorini, his arms wrapped around her. She dropped it face down and left it there. The ride back to the Empire. When the black Bentley arrived, the driver, an older man with sharp eyes, took her suitcase without a word. "Miss Sinclair," he said, opening the door. It had been years since anyone had addressed her by her true name in public. It felt like a piece of herself sliding back into place. The drive to the Sinclair estate was long enough for the city's steel and glass to fade into sprawling green hills. Memories came in flashes. Her mother in the garden, the echo of her father's laughter in the marble halls, her teenage rebellion against endless charity events and investor dinners. By the time they passed the wrought iron gates engraved with the Sinclair crest, Ava's pulse had shifted from dread to resolve. The meeting with Uncle Richard. The main hall was, as she remembered, polished marble, a sweeping staircase, walls lined with oil portraits of ancestors who looked as if they could step out of the frame and critique your posture. Uncle Richard waited at the base of the stairs, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. He studied her for a long moment before pulling her into a surprisingly warm hug. "You've lost weight," he said, frowning. "And you're 6 months?" She nodded, hand resting protectively over her belly. "It's Ethan's." His frown deepened, and his voice took on that clipped tone that had terrified CEOs in boardrooms across 3 continents. "Then tell me everything." They moved to the library, a vast room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a fire crackling in the hearth despite the mild spring day. Ava told him the story from the beginning. How she had met Ethan under her assumed name, how she'd kept her identity secret, and how he'd thrown her aside for Sienna Vale. Richard listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "He thinks you're powerless," Richard said. "That's good. Let him think that a little longer." A strategic pause. Ava had expected him to suggest immediate retaliation. Press releases, legal action, a very public display of wealth and influence. Instead, Richard poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. "We don't start with revenge. We start with control." "Control of what?" she asked. "Control of the narrative," he replied. Right now, the story is about Ethan and his model. We need to make sure you become the story, on our terms. Ava took a slow sip of water. I don't want sympathy. You won't get sympathy, Richard said. You'll get respect. The first step that afternoon, Ava's old phone was replaced with a new one, loaded with encrypted apps and contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. Board members, legal advisors, PR strategists. Her wardrobe was replaced too. Gone were the casual dresses and worn cardigans, replaced by sleek silhouettes in bold, commanding colors. Ava stood before a full-length mirror in a fitted black dress and pearl earrings, hair swept into a low chignon. She didn't look like the woman Ethan had walked out on. She looked like the daughter of Elizabeth Sinclair. Her uncle's assistant entered with a tablet. The media is still covering Ethan and Sienna, but we can shift it. There's a tech summit in 2 days. If you attend publicly, it will set off questions. Ava smiled faintly. Questions are good. Ethan's side of the story. Across the city, Ethan was basking in the attention. Sienna laughed at his jokes during a televised interview, her hand resting lightly on his arm as the host gushed about their chemistry. Behind the scenes, Ethan's team was working overtime to spin the divorce as a mutual decision. But cracks were forming. Investors had begun whispering about his judgment, concerned that personal drama could affect the company's image. Ethan brushed it off. Ava didn't have the connections or resources to challenge him, he was sure of it. Ava's resolve. Back at the estate, Ava walked through the garden where her mother used to spend mornings before meetings. She felt the baby move, a small, insistent reminder of why she couldn't afford to falter. This wasn't just about her pride or revenge. It was about securing a future for her child, one that wasn't tainted by Ethan's arrogance. She stopped by the fountain at the center of the garden, the sound of water mingling with the rustle of leaves. She could almost hear her mother's voice. Strength isn't loud, Ava. It's steady. Her phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Be in the boardroom at 9 a.m. tomorrow. You're going to like this. The mini cliffhanger. The next morning, she stepped into the Sinclair Technologies boardroom for the first time in years. Every head turned as she entered, not just because of her presence, but because of the empty chair at the head of the table. Richard gestured toward it. It's yours now, Ava. Effective immediately. The leather of the chair was cool beneath her fingertips. Ava had sat in many boardrooms before, but never at the head of this table. The Sinclair Technologies boardroom was an empire in itself. A massive oval of polished walnut surrounded by windows that offered a panoramic view of the skyline. On the walls, framed patents and innovation awards told the story of a dynasty that had changed the world. She took her seat. The quiet in the room was thick, every board member watching her, as though they'd just witnessed a seismic shift. Uncle Richard stood at her side. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice a perfect blend of authority and pride, allow me to reintroduce Ava Sinclair, not as my niece, but as your new chairwoman. A ripple of murmurs passed around the table. Some faces lit with recognition, others, particularly those who had joined the board during Ava's self-imposed absence, looked puzzled. She's back to stay, Richard continued, and she has full voting power, effective immediately. A legacy in her hands, Ava folded her hands on the table. Thank you, Uncle Richard, and thank you to the board for trusting me with what my mother built. Her voice was steady, though her heart was pounding. I left because I needed to understand who I was without this name. Now I know, and I'm here because there's work to be done. The first agenda item wasn't about Ethan, but he was already woven into her thoughts. Sinclair Technologies had the resources to move markets, and in the right hands, it could also shift the balance of power in an industry Ethan depended on. Before we move on, Ava said, scanning the room, I want a full report on all current partnerships, especially those involving cross-dynamics. That got their attention. Several board members exchanged wary glances. The first play by lunch, Ava had learned the basics. Cross-Dynamics had just secured a joint development agreement with a smaller AI firm, one Sinclair Technologies had quietly invested in 5 years ago. Ethan thought he was expanding into predictive analytics. He had no idea that Sinclair held majority control over the patents involved. Richard smirked when she pointed it out. So what do you want to do? Nothing, Ava said, leaning back in her chair. Not yet. We let him build, let him spend millions marketing the product, then we call in our rights. Richard laughed softly. Cold. I like it. Meanwhile, in Ethan's world, Ethan was riding high on his latest press feature. Tech's new power couple, Ethan Kross and Sienna Vale. The article praised his visionary leadership and Sienna's magnetic brand appeal, painting them as unstoppable. He forwarded the link to his head of PR with a note, "This is the energy I want everywhere." But there was an email he didn't notice, one from his CFO, warning that an upcoming payment to their AI partner was being delayed for contractual review. It was the first subtle tremor of the earthquake Ava was planning. Ava's public return. 2 days later, Ava made her first public appearance in over a year at the annual International Tech Summit. Cameras flashed as she stepped out of the black Bentley, the simple elegance of her navy-sheathed dress making as much of a statement as the discreet diamond earrings she wore. Journalists swarmed. "Miss Sinclair, are you here to announce a new partnership? Why now, after so much time away from the public eye? Is it true you're pregnant?" Ava smiled, offering no comment beyond, "I'm here for the future." Inside, she worked the room with calculated precision. Every handshake was photographed, every conversation noted. By the time she reached the Sinclair Technologies booth, social media was already ablaze with photos and headlines. Ava Sinclair, Heiress returns to the game. Ethan reacts. That night, Ethan sat in his penthouse scrolling through news feeds. Sienna was on the couch beside him, sipping champagne. "Who's Ava Sinclair?" she asked casually. Ethan froze. "No one you need to worry about." But his stomach tightened. He knew the name. He'd heard it in passing at conferences, always with a certain reverence. He'd never connected it to the quiet, self-contained woman he'd married. "She looks like she means business," Sienna said, tapping the screen. "And isn't that your AI partner she's talking to in this photo?" Ethan's jaw clenched. Coincidence. But it didn't feel like one. The quiet storm. Back at the Sinclair estate, Ava sat in her study, reviewing documents that outlined every weak point in Ethan's business. Her legal team was already drafting contingency plans for seizing patent rights if necessary. It wasn't just about hitting him financially, it was about dismantling the myth he'd built around himself. In his world, image was currency, and she was about to bankrupt him in both. Richard entered with 2 glasses of sparkling water. "You've caused a stir," he said, handing her one. "Half the industry is wondering why you're back, the other half is guessing what you'll do next." Ava took a sip. "Good. I want him to feel the walls closing in before they actually do." Ethan's first setback. A week later, Ethan's CFO walked into his office looking grim. "We've got a problem. The AI partner you signed with, their controlling shareholder has called for a renegotiation, and that shareholder is Sinclair Technologies." Ethan's blood ran cold. "Sinclair?" "Yes, sir, and from what I hear, Ava Sinclair is calling the shots now." It hit him like a punch. The pieces clicked into place. The last name, her sudden public reappearance, the calculated calm she'd shown when he'd left her. "She played me," he muttered, more to himself than to the CFO. The turning point. That night, Ethan called Ava. She didn't answer. He tried again. Voicemail. He sent a short text. "We need to talk." No reply. In the quiet of her study, Ava read the message and set her phone aside. Let him sweat. She wasn't ready to speak to him until the boardroom, and the cameras were watching. The mini cliffhanger. 3 days later, an invitation arrived at Ethan's office. Gold embossed, bearing the Sinclair Technologies seal. It was for a special joint industry announcement to be held at the Grand Manhattan Hotel. At the bottom, in elegant script, was a single line, hosted by Ava Sinclair, chairwoman. The Grand Manhattan Hotel had hosted presidents, royal weddings, and billion-dollar merger signings, but that morning, it belonged to Ava Sinclair. The marble lobby gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and a red-carpeted staircase led to the ballroom where the press conference would take place. Rows of velvet chairs faced a long stage draped in Sinclair Technologies' navy and silver banners. Camera crews were already setting up when Ava arrived, escorted by Richard and 2 of the company's senior executives. Her presence was electric. Journalists craned their necks, flashes popped, and the low hum of speculation filled the air. Ethan Kross was nowhere to be seen yet. The calm before the strike backstage, Ava reviewed her notes, though she knew the speech by heart. This wasn't just an industry announcement. This was the first public move in her calculated dismantling of Ethan's empire. The timing, the optics, the stakes, everything had been engineered to ensure maximum impact. Richard leaned in. Remember, we're not here to humiliate him. We're here to shift the market's confidence. Ava gave him a look that was both amused and icy. The market will get the message, and so will he. Ethan's arrival. 15 minutes before the event began, Ethan strode into the ballroom with Sienna on his arm, both dressed as if for a magazine cover shoot. His navy suit was immaculate, his cufflinks catching the light. Sienna's white silk dress was cut to perfection. Cameras swiveled instantly, reporters calling out questions about their power couple status. Ethan smiled for the flashbulbs, but when his gaze found Ava across the room, his expression shifted, just for a second, from smug to wary. She didn't look away. The opening act. The MC, a well-known business journalist, stepped to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this very special joint industry announcement. Today marks a strategic partnership between Sinclair Technologies and... He paused for effect. Cross Dynamics. A buzz rippled through the audience. Ethan had clearly expected to control the narrative, but Ava had forced him onto her stage, under her rules. Ava walked forward, every step deliberate, her heels clicking against the polished wood. She took her place at the podium beside Ethan, their proximity a picture-perfect photo op, for everyone but him. A calculated speech. "Good morning," Ava began, her voice carrying easily over the room. As many of you know, Sinclair Technologies has a long history of innovation and strategic growth. Today, we're expanding that legacy with a joint venture that will revolutionize predictive analytics. She turned slightly toward Ethan, her smile poised. Cross Dynamics will be our operational partner, working under the umbrella of Sinclair Technologies' patent portfolio. Together, we aim to bring advanced forecasting tools to markets worldwide. The phrasing was subtle but devastating. Under the umbrella was corporate language for who held the power. Investors in the room understood instantly. Ethan's jaw tightened. The investor's question. From the audience, a hand shot up. It belonged to a prominent venture capitalist known for backing aggressive tech plays. "Miss Sinclair, could you clarify? Will Sinclair Technologies hold controlling interest in this partnership?" "Yes," Ava said smoothly. "Sinclair retains majority ownership of the intellectual property and product rights. Cross Dynamics will manage implementation under our strategic guidance." Gasps and murmurs filled the ballroom. Ethan's face was a mask, but his knuckles whitened against the podium. Sienna's slip, as Ava fielded more questions. Sienna whispered something to Ethan, loud enough for a few nearby reporters to hear. "I thought you said you had full control." The words spread like wildfire among the press, their pens scribbling furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Ethan's reaction, a flicker of irritation he tried to disguise as a smile. Ava caught it and tucked it away for later. The market responds. By the time the conference ended, headlines were already flooding news sites. Sinclair Technologies dominates new partnership. Cross Dynamics ceded control in predictive analytics deal. Stock tickers reflected the shift. Sinclair shares climbed 4% before noon. Cross Dynamics dipped by nearly 3%. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was a public crack in Ethan's armor, a private exchange. As guests began to disperse, Ethan caught up to Ava near the side exit. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. "Business," she said lightly, stepping past him. "You blindsided me," he pressed. "You could have negotiated." "I did," she cut in, turning to face him. "You just weren't invited to the table." His eyes narrowed. "This isn't over," she smiled faintly. "No, Ethan, it's just beginning." Back at the estate Muftran. That evening, Ava sat in her study watching the replay of the conference on a muted screen. She studied Ethan's face frame by frame, the small giveaways in his posture, the moments where the mask slipped. She wanted him on edge, second-guessing every move. Richard entered with a folder. "We've got more leverage. Cross Dynamics has 2 major supply contracts expiring next quarter. Guess who owns the suppliers?" Ava didn't need to guess. "Perfect. We'll renegotiate terms in our favor." Ethan's growing desperation. At his penthouse, Ethan was on the phone with his legal team. "Find me a way to challenge their majority control. Anything." "Legally, they're airtight," his lawyer replied. "They've had these patents for years. You walked straight into this one." Ethan ended the call and poured himself a drink. He had underestimated her. Badly. And now she was using the one arena he couldn't dominate with charm or press photos. The boardroom. The mini cliffhanger. 3 days later, Ethan received a summons, not to court, but to a shareholder emergency meeting at Cross Dynamics. The attached agenda had just 3 words: vote of confidence. The Cross Dynamics boardroom was usually a place where Ethan commanded the floor. Today, it felt like enemy territory. The air was tight with tension, the polished oak tables surrounded by shareholders whose expressions ranged from politely curious to openly hostile. The vote of confidence agenda item loomed on the printed packets in front of every seat. Ethan adjusted his tie and forced a confident smile. "Good morning. I know there's been chatter after the Sinclair announcement, but let me assure you, our partnership is strong and our leadership is focused on growth." A few polite nods. No applause. The first blow. The first question came from Harold Drake, a longtime investor with a reputation for being blunt. "Ethan, why were shareholders not informed that Sinclair Technologies held majority control over the predictive analytics project before the deal was signed?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Because that detail doesn't affect our ability to execute." "It affects our leverage," Harold cut in. "It affects our valuation. It affects everything." The murmurs around the table grew louder. Ethan felt the shift. He wasn't controlling the narrative here. Ava's ghost in the room. As the questions piled on, Ethan realized the unspoken truth. Ava wasn't in the room physically, but her presence was everywhere. Her name came up 3 times in the first 20 minutes, always with respect, always with the implication that she'd outmaneuvered him. "Mr. Cross?" another shareholder asked, "has Miss Sinclair expressed any intent to acquire a larger stake in Cross Dynamics?" Ethan kept his tone even. "Not to me," which was true. But the truth didn't matter when the market believed otherwise. The surprise appearance. Halfway through the meeting, the double doors at the back of the room opened. A woman in a tailored charcoal suit stepped inside, her heels silent against the carpet. Every head turned. It was Ava. She didn't speak at first, just handed a sealed envelope to the board secretary. "These are documents for your immediate review," she said, her voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is this?" "A courtesy," Ava replied smoothly, "so no one can say they weren't informed." The documents inside the envelope was a formal notice. Sinclair Technologies had acquired a 12% stake in Cross Dynamics over the past quarter through a series of shell companies. Combined with friendly shareholders already aligned with Sinclair, Ava effectively controlled nearly 1/3 of the voting power in the room. The impact was immediate. Chairs shifted. Side conversations erupted. Ethan's CFO looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. "This isn't a takeover," Ava said, her tone almost gentle. "It's a partnership. But I believe partnerships work best when there's transparency and capable leadership." The implication landed like a sledgehammer. The vote. The vote of confidence was called sooner than expected. Ethan made his case in a tight, clipped speech, but the momentum was gone. The numbers were close, but he survived, barely. Enough shareholders still believed replacing him now would cause more instability than keeping him in place. When the meeting adjourned, Ethan stalked toward Ava in the hallway. "You came here to humiliate me." "No," she said. "I came here to warn them." "Warn them about what?" he demanded. She smiled faintly. "About storms they don't see coming." Ethan's countermove. That night, Ethan called in favors. If Ava thought she could box him in with quiet maneuvers, he dragged the battle into the public arena. He arranged an exclusive interview with a major business network, framing the Sinclair stake as friendly collaboration and downplaying rumors of conflict. "Cross Dynamics is strong," he told the cameras, "and I have no doubt our partnership with Sinclair will drive unprecedented innovation." But as soon as the segment aired, Ava's PR team released a statement of their own. Sinclair Technologies is committed to supporting Cross Dynamics' growth, under leadership that prioritizes transparency and strategic foresight. It was a perfect mirror, polite, professional, and devastating. The quiet planning. Back at the Sinclair estate, Ava reviewed a list of Ethan's upcoming speaking engagements, partnerships, and investor dinners. "Every event he attends," she told Richard, "will have a presence there, not to confront him, just to remind people that I'm watching." Richard smirked. You're making him fight shadows. Exactly, she said. Shadows are harder to hit. Sienna feels the pressure. Sienna wasn't used to being ignored, but lately Ethan was distracted, tense, and often on the phone late into the night. The lavish dates slowed, replaced by strategy meetings and emergency calls. One evening, she confronted him. This isn't fun anymore, Ethan. You're obsessed with her. I'm not obsessed, he snapped. I'm managing the situation. Sienna folded her arms. Managing or losing? Ava's next move. A week later, invitations went out for the Sinclair Foundation's annual charity gala, a black tie event that doubled as a showcase for the family's influence. Ava had skipped it for years. This time, her name was on the top of the host list. The guest list read like a who's who of the business and political elite. Ethan and Sienna were both invited, though Ava doubted they'd dare decline. Richard caught her eye as they reviewed the seating chart. You're setting a stage. Ava's smile was slow and deliberate. I'm building a theater. The mini cliffhanger. On the night of the gala, the red carpet was a blaze of flashbulbs. Ava stepped out of the Bentley in a sweeping black gown, diamonds catching the light like shards of ice. Cameras roared her name, and at the far end of the carpet she saw Ethan and Sienna arrive, right as the press shouted, "Ava! Over here!" with them for a photo. The Sinclair Foundation's annual charity gala was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, a glittering evening where billionaires, politicians, and celebrities mingled under the pretense of philanthropy. Tonight, however, it was more than a fundraiser. It was Ava Sinclair's battlefield. The ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel shimmered under chandeliers the size of small cars. Crystal flutes of champagne sparkled on silver trays, and the air was thick with the scent of orchids flown in from Singapore. A 40-foot digital display cycled through images of Sinclair-funded projects, schools, hospitals, tech incubators. But no one was looking at the screen. All eyes were on Ava. The entrance. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone born to command it. Her black silk gown flowed like liquid, and the deep V of the neckline was offset by the perfect drape of a diamond necklace. She greeted donors, shook hands with senators, posed for photographs. Every time the cameras flashed, Ethan saw it. She wasn't the quiet, modest woman he'd left. She was a presence, magnetic, untouchable. Sienna clung to his arm as they stepped into the room, her silver dress catching the light. But while heads turned to acknowledge them, the photographers weren't shouting their names. They were shouting Ava's. The first encounter. It didn't take long for them to cross paths. Ava was speaking with the mayor when Ethan approached, Sienna in tow. "Madam Chairwoman," Ethan said with a practiced smile. Impressive turnout. Ava's gaze flicked to him, cool and unreadable. "We have generous supporters. They believe in causes that matter." Sienna forced a laugh. "Like helping, whatever it is your foundation does?" The mayor's eyebrows rose. Ava's smile never faltered. "Education, healthcare, and innovation," she said smoothly. "Things that leave a lasting impact. Unlike a seasonal runway show." The mayor chuckled under his breath and excused himself. The donor table dinner was served at long banquet tables arranged in a horseshoe around the stage. Ava had placed Ethan and Sienna at a prime table near the front, but directly across from her. It was deliberate. Every time he looked up, she was there, poised and engaged with the city's most influential people. Midway through the meal, the MC announced a special guest speaker, Ava Sinclair herself. Ethan stiffened. He hadn't been warned about this. A speech with layers. Ava stepped to the podium, her voice carrying easily through the hall. She spoke about the foundation's projects. The lives changed. The importance of innovation not just in business but in compassion. Then her tone shifted. "Partnerships," she said, "are built on trust, transparency, and mutual respect. Without those, even the most promising ventures can falter. I've learned that the hard way, but I've also learned how to rebuild stronger than before." It wasn't overt, but it didn't need to be. The room caught the subtext. Cameras zoomed in on Ethan's face. Sienna's misstep. As applause filled the room, Sienna leaned toward Ethan. "You didn't tell me she was this good." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was loud enough for the venture capitalist beside her to hear. That VC happened to be a Sinclair ally. Within minutes, the comment made its way back to Ava via discreet text from Richard. "She's rattled him in front of donors." Ava allowed herself a small sip of champagne, her expression unreadable. the silent auction power play. After dinner, guests wandered to the silent auction tables. Luxury vacations, art pieces, rare wines. Ava had donated a week-long retreat at the Sinclair estate in Provence, complete with private jet transportation. Ethan's competitive streak flared when he saw it. He scribbled his bid, determined to win at least one headline-worthy prize tonight. An hour later, the final bids were revealed. Ethan's name was there, but below Ava's, who had outbid him by $1, reclaiming her own donation for publicity and control. It was petty. It was perfect. The dance floor. The band struck up a slow jazz number, and couples began to fill the dance floor. Ava accepted a dance from the governor, her laughter ringing clear across the room. Photographers swarmed. Ethan, watching from the edge, could feel the narrative slipping. He'd come here expecting to show unity and charm with Sienna. Instead, the evening belonged to Ava. Sienna tugged at his sleeve. "Dance with me," she whispered, desperation edging her voice. He obliged, but halfway through the song, Ava and the governor danced past them. She caught Ethan's eye, just long enough to make him miss a step. The closing move. As the night drew to a close, Ava took the microphone once more to thank guests. "Tonight, we've raised over $12 million for initiatives that will shape the future," she announced to thunderous applause. Then, with a glance toward Ethan, she added, "And in the coming months, Sinclair Technologies will unveil projects that redefine what's possible when leadership is aligned with purpose." It was an announcement with no specifics, but it landed like a warning shot. The message was clear. Bigger moves were coming. Backstage fallout. In the green room after the gala, Richard handed Ava a glass of water. "You just owned the room." "That was the point," she said, removing her earrings. "He needed to see that no matter where we are, I control the tone. And everyone else needs to see it too." Her phone buzzed, a message from one of Ethan's minority shareholders. "If you're serious about change at Cross Dynamics, I'm ready to talk." Ava's smile was slow, deliberate. "It's starting." The mini cliffhanger. An hour later, while the city slept, a courier delivered a thick envelope to the Sinclair estate. Inside was a confidential document marked in bold, "Acquisition Proposal, Cross Dynamics." And at the bottom, the offer was signed not by Ava, but by 3 of Ethan's own board members. The envelope sat on Ava's desk like a loaded weapon. 3 Cross Dynamics board members, men who had once stood firmly in Ethan's corner, were now offering her a path to controlling his company outright. Richard read the proposal twice, then looked up at her. "They're serious. They've had enough of him." Ava traced a finger along the embossed Sinclair letterhead she'd been using for recent communications. "If they're coming to me, it means he's losing more than just market confidence. He's losing his own people." Behind enemy lines, across the city, Ethan was in damage control mode. His days were a blur of investor calls, emergency strategy meetings, and frantic texts to board members. Each conversation felt like it ended with the same polite but distant promise. "We'll see how the next quarter goes." Sienna noticed the shift. Their dinners had turned into silent meals. The lavish trips he'd once promised were postponed. Her patience was wearing thin. One evening, she confronted him. "Ethan, you're losing this." He didn't look up from his laptop. "I'm managing it." "Managing what?" she pressed. "Ava's everywhere, on the news, at events, in your contracts. She's making you look like a fool." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then it's time we change the game." Ava's strategy session. At the Sinclair estate, Ava gathered her inner circle. Richard, her PR head, her chief legal counsel, and a representative from their mergers and acquisitions team. The acquisition proposal was projected onto the wall. "The offer is solid," the M&A rep explained. "If we match it with Sinclair's capital, we'd have controlling interest in Cross Dynamics within weeks." Ava's expression was calm, but her mind was sharp with calculation. "I'm not interested in just taking his company. I want him to choose to give it up." Richard raised an eyebrow. "And how exactly do you plan to make him do that?" She leaned back in her chair. "By making every day he stays in charge more painful than leaving." The pressure builds. The next week, Sinclair Technologies announced a new research initiative in predictive AI, one that directly competed with Ethan's prized project. The press release framed it as building on existing patents, a subtle reminder that Sinclair owned the technology's foundation. Investors noticed. Analysts began questioning Cross-Dynamics' long-term viability on financial news segments. Stock prices wavered. Ethan's CFO came into his office with a grim update. "We lost 2 major institutional investors today. They're shifting to Sinclair." Ethan slammed his pen on the desk. "Who?" The CFO hesitated. "One of them was a board ally until last week." Sienna's growing frustration. Sienna began to feel like collateral damage in a war she hadn't signed up for. She'd gone from being the glamorous new chapter in Ethan's life to a background accessory in his increasingly frantic schedule. At a dinner with friends, she overheard someone whisper, "She traded the wrong stock." Laughter followed. That night, she asked Ethan point blank, "If she takes your company, what happens to us?" He stared at her for a moment before answering, "She won't take it." But his voice lacked conviction. An unlikely call. Late one evening, Ava's phone buzzed with an unknown number. She answered, and to her surprise, it was Sienna. "I'm not calling to be your friend," Sienna said without preamble. "But I think you should know, Ethan's planning something. He's meeting with a private equity group next week. He's going to try to raise capital to block you." Ava kept her voice neutral. "And why are you telling me this?" "Because if he loses, I don't want to be standing next to him when it happens," Sienna replied. "And because you're going to win anyway." The countermove. The next day, Ava's legal counsel secured meetings with 2 of the largest private equity firms in the country, both with histories of working with Sinclair Technologies. By the end of the week, those firms had publicly declared the support for Sinclair's vision for industry innovation, effectively cutting off Ethan's lifeline before he could grab it. Richard grinned as the news broke. "You didn't just close a door, you bricked it shut." Ava allowed herself a small smile. "Now we wait for him to realize he's running out of exits." Ethan's breaking point. When Ethan heard the news, he went quiet. Too quiet. His COO watched him closely during their next meeting. "Ethan, we need to start contingency planning. If Sinclair pushes for a hostile takeover." "There won't be a takeover," Ethan interrupted, "because I'm not giving her the satisfaction." But that night, alone in his penthouse, he stared out at the city lights and felt the walls closing in. Every option was narrowing. Every call with the board was colder than the last. The dinner invitation. 2 days later, Ethan received an envelope delivered by hand. Inside was a simple, handwritten note. "Dinner. Neutral ground, just us. Ava." The location was a private dining room at the top of the St. Regis. No media, no board members, just them. Ethan stared at the note for a long time before tucking it into his jacket pocket. The mini cliffhanger. That evening, he arrived at the St. Regis to find Ava already seated at a candlelit table by the window, the skyline sprawling behind her. She looked calm, almost serene, as she set down her wine glass. "Ethan," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "let's talk about the price of your piece." The St. Regis dining room was nearly empty, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a living painting. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, the low light glinting off polished silverware. Ava sat poised, hands resting lightly on the table, a vision of calm control. Ethan approached, his jaw tight but his expression neutral. He took the seat across from her without shaking her hand. "You picked a nice spot," he said flatly. "I wanted privacy," Ava replied. "And clarity." A waiter appeared with a bottle of wine, but neither of them touched it. This was not a dinner for indulgence, it was a negotiation. Opening moves, Ethan leaned forward. "If you're here to gloat, save it. I'm still in control of Cross-Dynamics." "For now," Ava said evenly, "but every day, you lose more ground. Your board is fractured, your investors are looking elsewhere, and you know I have the resources to wait you out." He gave a humorless laugh. "You always did like the long game." "I learned from the best," she said, her tone soft but edged with steel. The offer. Ava slid a folder across the table. Inside was a document labeled Proposed Transition Agreement. "I'm offering you a way out," she said. "You resign as CEO, publicly. In exchange, Sinclair Technologies acquires Cross-Dynamics at a premium that protects your reputation and your remaining shares. You walk away with enough to start over, quietly." Ethan's eyes scanned the pages. "This is generous," he said finally. "Too generous, which means you want something more." "What I want," Ava said, "is to end this on my terms, not drag it through court and the press." Pride and fear, Ethan closed the folder and set it aside. "You think you can buy my dignity?" I think, Ava said slowly, you've already sold it. To the media, to your ego, to anyone who believed your story about trading up for a model and leaving your powerless spat wife behind. His jaw tightened. This isn't about the marriage anymore. Ava's eyes locked onto his. It's always been about the marriage. You just didn't realize it was also about the business. A flash of vulnerability. For a moment, Ethan's confidence faltered. He glanced toward the window, the city lights flickering like distant fires. I built Cross Dynamics, he said quietly. From nothing. Every deal, every product. On patents Sinclair Technologies owns, Ava interrupted. On a network my family helped you access. You didn't build it alone, Ethan. You just convinced yourself you did. He met her gaze again, the anger returning. And what if I don't sign? The consequences. Ava's voice didn't rise, but it cut through the space between them. Then I keep tightening the noose. Every contract, every supplier, every investor you rely on, I'll be there first. Your stock will bleed value. Your board will vote you out. And when it's over, you'll be a footnote in a business journal article about corporate arrogance. Silence settled between them. The waiter returned to refill their water glasses, oblivious to the quiet war unfolding. Ethan's counterplay. You think you've cornered me, Ethan said. But there's one thing you're forgetting. I still have allies. And not all of them play by your family's rules. Which allies? Ava asked, tilting her head. The ones who already called me this week? Or the ones who've been selling their shares before the next quarter's report? He blinked, the slightest pause revealing the truth. The personal blow, Ethan shifted tactics. What's this really about, Ava? Revenge? Proving you're stronger than me? Her expression softened, not with forgiveness but with certainty. It's about our child. I will not let their name be tied to your recklessness. This isn't vengeance, Ethan. This is protection. For the first time his eyes dropped to her midsection, to the subtle curve beneath the tailored dress. Something unreadable crossed his face. Regret, maybe, but it vanished quickly. A closing window. I'll give you 72 hours, Ava said, sliding the folder back toward him. After that, the offer disappears, and so does your control. He stood, leaving the folder on the table. You're underestimating me. Or, Ava replied, I know you better than anyone. He walked out without another word, his reflection in the glass shrinking as he moved away. Richard's assessment. Back at the Sinclair estate later that night, Ava found Richard waiting in her study. Well? He asked. He's stalling, Ava said, sinking into her chair. He's not ready to admit he's lost. Richard handed her a folder of his own. Then we make the decision for him. We've got enough shareholder support to trigger a special resolution. If we move now, we could vote him out within 2 weeks. Ava looked at the papers, then shook her head. Not yet. Let him feel the clock ticking. Ethan's next call. In his penthouse, Ethan poured himself a drink and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. It's Ethan, he said when the line picked up. I need a favor. Something off the books. The voice on the other end chuckled. Sounds like trouble? You have no idea, Ethan replied. The mini cliffhanger. 2 nights later, Ava's head of security entered her office with a grim expression. We've got a problem. Someone's been digging into your private accounts and your travel schedule. On his desk was a surveillance photo of Ava leaving the St. Regis. The man in the background, partially hidden, was Ethan. The photo lay on Ava's desk like a warning. Ethan lurking in the background of her St. Regis meeting wasn't coincidence, it was surveillance. And surveillance meant he was done playing strictly in the corporate arena. Richard paced in front of her. If he's moving into personal territory, we need to escalate security. You can't risk being caught off guard. Ava closed the folder containing the photo. Security, yes, but I'm not hiding. If he wants to watch me, I'll give him a performance worth remembering. The industry panel, a week later, the International Business Leadership Forum, was set to host a televised panel on the future of predictive technology. Ava had been confirmed as the keynote speaker months ago. Ethan's name appeared on the panel list 2 days before the event, added at the insistence of one of the sponsors. It was obvious he wanted to share the stage, maybe even publicly challenge her. Richard wasn't thrilled. It's a setup. He'll try to bait you. Then I'll bait him first, Ava replied. Preparing the stage. The morning of the panel, Ava's PR head briefed her in the green room. Half the industry's eyes are on this. If you land the right hit, you can push him over the edge. Ava nodded. And if I push him far enough, the board will see him for exactly what he is. The plan was simple. Control the narrative, keep her composure, and plant seeds of doubt in the minds of Cross Dynamics' remaining loyalists. The first exchange. The panel began under bright stage lights. Cameras panned over the audience, CEOs, investors, reporters, before settling on the lineup of speakers. Ava in a sleek navy dress, Ethan in a sharp charcoal suit. The moderator opened with broad questions about innovation and market trends. Ava answered with precision, speaking about transparency, sustainable growth, and the responsibility of tech leaders to think beyond quarterly profits. When Ethan's turn came, he emphasized risk-taking, speed over hesitation, and owning the market before anyone else can. It was corporate philosophy dressed up as bravado. The tension breaks. Midway through, the moderator asked, "What do you think is the biggest threat to innovation in this space?" Ethan smirked. Interference. When competitors meddle in projects they didn't start, just to take credit later. It was a shot across the table. Ava smiled slightly. The real threat isn't competition. It's arrogance. Leaders who believe they're untouchable stop listening, stop adapting, and when they stop adapting, they lose. The crowd reacted with a low murmur. Ethan's jaw flexed, his eyes narrowing. The reveal toward the end, the moderator asked about future projects. Ava leaned in. Sinclair Technologies is preparing to launch a platform that will integrate predictive analytics into global logistics. We expect to hold exclusive rights in every sector that relies on these patents. Every sector. The phrase hung in the air. Industry insiders knew exactly what it meant. Ethan's flagship product would be locked out of key markets. Ethan turned toward her. And if those rights were challenged in court? Ava didn't miss a beat. We'd win. We've been winning for months. Ethan slips. The moderator tried to pivot, but Ethan's voice cut through. And what happens when the person making those decisions has personal vendettas driving them? It was reckless, too personal for a public forum. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Cameras zoomed in on Ava, waiting for her reaction. She met his gaze, calm and unflinching. Personal history doesn't change facts. And the fact is, leadership is about stability, which is why shareholders should think carefully about who they trust with the future of their company. The blow was clean and devastating. After the panel. In the green room afterward, reporters crowded Ava with questions. She answered selectively, keeping the focus on her projects. Ethan was across the room, speaking in hushed tones to his COO. His face was tight, controlled, but his hands gave him away, flexing and clenching like he was barely containing himself. Richard slipped beside Ava. "We've got calls from 2 more Cross Dynamics board members. They're ready to talk." "Good," Ava said. "Set the meetings." Ethan's fracture. That night, Ethan confronted his COO. "You told me this panel was my chance to show strength. Instead, she made me look like I was unraveling." His COO didn't deny it. "Because you are. You're fighting on her terms, and the board's starting to ask if you can handle the pressure." Ethan grabbed his coat. "Then I'll show them pressure." The next morning, at 8 a.m., Ava's PR team was alerted to a press release from Cross Dynamics. Ethan Cross announces aggressive expansion plan to outpace Sinclair Technologies. It was bold, borderline reckless, especially without the capital to back it. Ava's chief legal counsel looked up from the release. "If he pushes this through, he'll burn through his cash reserves in 6 months." Ava's smile was cold. "Then we just need to make sure the burn happens faster." The mini cliffhanger. That afternoon, Ava received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a single page torn from a legal pad. In bold handwriting it read, "You're not the only one who knows how to play dirty. See you at the gala." The city's winter charity gala was the kind of event that made front-page headlines and filled glossy magazine spreads. Under the vaulted ceiling of the Glass House Pavilion, glittering snowflake chandeliers hung above a sea of sequined gowns and tuxedos. The air was crisp, with the scent of pine garlands and expensive perfume. Ava stepped out of her car into a blizzard of camera flashes. She wore a white satin gown with a cape that trailed behind her like fresh snow. Diamonds glimmered at her throat and wrists, and a single pearl pin, her mother's, anchored her sleek chignon. Tonight wasn't just about charity. It was about closure. The atmosphere shifts inside. Music swelled from a live orchestra. Guests sipped champagne, exchanging pleasantries under towering floral arrangements. But there was an undercurrent in the room. People knew something was brewing between Ava Sinclair and Ethan Cross. Ethan arrived 20 minutes later with Sienna on his arm. He was dressed in midnight blue, polished and smiling for the cameras. But the moment he saw Ava across the room, his smile faltered just enough for the photographers to catch it. The first move. Richard appeared at Ava's side. "Our allies are here. 3 more board members confirmed they'll vote with us if it comes to it." Ava glanced toward Ethan, who was shaking hands with a venture capitalist she'd already secured on her side. "Then tonight, we give them the reason to move now." The evening's schedule called for speeches, a live auction, and a closing toast. Ava knew exactly where she would make her move. The auction midway through the night, the auctioneer presented a final lot, an exclusive partnership opportunity with Sinclair Technologies to develop a charitable tech initiative. The bidding started high, and then Ethan raised his hand. The crowd murmured. It was unusual for one company to bid on another's philanthropic project, but Ethan clearly wanted a headline. Ava let him push the number higher and higher, her expression unreadable. When the price reached a staggering figure, she lifted her paddle and doubled it. The room erupted. Cameras flashed, Ethan's jaw tightened. To toast near midnight, the MC invited Ava to give the closing toast. She stepped to the microphone, her voice carrying with effortless authority. "Tonight, we've raised over $14 million for causes that matter deeply to this city. But more than that, we've seen what can happen when leaders commit to vision, integrity, and collaboration." She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room before settling briefly, pointedly, on Ethan. "The future belongs to those who put purpose above ego, and that is how I will continue to lead in every arena." The applause was immediate, the message unmistakable, Ethan's breaking point. As the crowd mingled, Ethan approached her. "You really think this little performance will push me out?" Ava smiled faintly. "It's not just tonight. It's been months of you losing control. This is just the finale." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I can still make this ugly." "You already did," she said, turning away. The board's decision. Richard intercepted her before she reached the exit. "We have the votes. The board's calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. Ethan will be asked to resign." Ava exhaled slowly. It was happening. After months of strategic moves, careful pressure, and public victories, the endgame was here. The next day, in Cross Dynamics' glass-walled boardroom, the atmosphere was heavy. The special resolution passed with a decisive majority. Ethan's resignation was immediate. He didn't look at Ava as he left the building, Sienna trailing behind him. Cameras swarmed, but he kept his head down. A new era. Weeks later, the press announced the official merger of Cross Dynamics into Sinclair Technologies. With Ava at the helm of the combined operations, share prices surged. Industry analysts called it a masterclass in corporate strategy. But to Ava, it was more than that. It was the final reclaiming of her life, her name, and her legacy. A private moment. That evening, she stood on the balcony of the Sinclair estate, the winter air crisp against her skin. Richard joined her, handing her a glass of champagne. "You won," he said simply. Ava looked out over the city lights. "I didn't just win. I built something worth winning for." Her hand rested lightly on her stomach. The future wasn't just about business. It was about family, stability, and never letting anyone dictate her worth again. The message. In her final press interview of the year, Ava summed it up for the world. Strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing up so tall after you've been knocked down that no one can ever push you the same way again. That's what every woman should remember. Your story is yours to write. The mini cliffhanger closing beat. As the cameras clicked, Ava received a text from an unknown number. It read, "Enjoy your victory. The game never really ends." Her smile didn't falter. This time, she was ready. So, that's how the story closes. My friends, you're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until now, then something in Ava's journey has touched your heart in its own way. Maybe it's the fire of justice, maybe it's the quiet strength she carried, or maybe it's the reminder that no one gets to write your ending but you. You see, life isn't about avoiding storms, it's about learning to stand tall in the middle of them. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great Stoic philosophers, once said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Ava's story shows exactly that. She couldn't control Ethan's betrayal, the rumors, or the corporate games, but she could control her choices, her dignity, her comeback. And she chose not just to survive, but to rise higher than before. Sometimes people will try to define you by your weakest moment. They'll make you believe that your worth depends on their approval. But here's the truth. You are the author of your story. As Epictetus said, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Ava reacted not with bitterness, but with strategy, courage, and purpose. And maybe you're facing your own Ethan right now. A person, a challenge, a season of loss. Remember, you are not powerless. The pain you feel today can be the fuel for the life you build tomorrow. You can step forward, reclaim your name, and write an ending that makes you proud. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that strength can be quiet, graceful, and unstoppable, then I invite you to keep walking this path with us. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own power, and subscribe so you never miss the next journey we take together. Because, my friends, the world will keep throwing storms at us, but together, we'll keep learning how to dance in the rain.